The Galactic Empire had ruled the stars for over 1,000 years, crushing any civilization that dared to resist. Their fleets spanned entire solar systems, their technology centuries beyond anything primitive species could dream of. When humanity finally crawled out of its own solar system, the Empire barely even noticed. Earth was classified as a developing world, a backwater planet with laughably crude technology. The Council of Admirals didn't even bother deploying their main fleets. A handful of automated defense platforms and a token garrison of low-ranking officers were deemed more than enough to keep the humans in line. And for a time, Earth played along. Humanity obeyed the trade restrictions, paid its tributes, and accepted its place in the galactic order. But deep in the shadows, away from prying eyes, Earth's best minds were building something different, something the Empire had never seen before. The Empire had dismissed human engineering as primitive, inefficient, and outdated. Their mistake. Because when the Sparrow launched from a hidden shipyard near Titan, the universe would never be the same again. At first glance, the Sparrow was a joke. It was barely the size of a corvette, its hull composed of a mishmash of materials scavenged from outdated Terran military projects. It had no energy shields, no plasma cannons, no gravitic propulsion. But that was just on the surface. The Sparrow wasn't designed with alien principles in mind. It wasn't built for traditional space combat. It was built to hunt, to adapt, and to exploit every weakness the Empire had overlooked. While the Empire's warships relied on centralized AI control, the Sparrow operated on human instinct, unpredictability, and gut decisions no algorithm could predict. Its weapon systems didn't rely on energy-based technology, but on solid-state railguns, archaic by galactic standards, but brutally effective against shielded hulls. While the Empire's ships prioritized elegant, long-range engagements, the Sparrow was built for close-quarters brutality. And most importantly, it had something no Imperial ship could ever dream of matching. Captain Cale Draven. A former fighter pilot, Draven had spent his life studying every Imperial battle doctrine, memorizing their formations, learning exactly how they thought. He knew the Empire didn't consider humans a threat. That was their weakness. And so, when the first shots of the rebellion were fired, they weren't from a fleet of Earth warships. They came from a single ship, the Sparrow. It struck without warning. The Imperial patrol frigate Valix was stationed near the mining colony of Epsilon Eridani, its crew half asleep from sheer boredom. After all, what possible threat could there be? The humans didn't even have proper warp drives. They barely had time to react when the Sparrow decloaked from behind an asteroid, moving at speeds that should have torn it apart. It didn't engage from a distance. It rammed the Valix, its railguns tearing through the frigate's engines before the Imperial crew even understood what was happening. By the time reinforcements arrived, the Valix was nothing but floating wreckage, its data logs wiped, its escape pods disabled. The Sparrow had vanished, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. The Empire was furious. One ship? A single human ship had done this? They laughed at first, dismissing it as an anomaly, a statistical fluke. They sent a squadron to track the Sparrow down, expecting a quick execution. They never returned. One ship had become a ghost, a phantom that struck and disappeared before the Empire could react. No matter how many warships they sent, the Sparrow was always one step ahead. It used tactics that defied logic, turning its own inertia into a weapon, attacking from angles Imperial targeting systems couldn't predict. It danced through enemy fire, its human pilot making split-second decisions no AI could process. Then the messages started. Intercepted transmissions from human resistance cells, whispers of Earth's secret war projects, reports of new prototype ships, built with knowledge gleaned from stolen Imperial databases. The Empire was no longer laughing. because the Sparrow was just the beginning. The Empire reacted the only way it knew how, with overwhelming force. They deployed the 7th Armada, a fleet of warships that had previously crushed an uprising on the industrial world of Kelleros V within a single day. Hundreds of ships, battle-hardened crews, and the full might of Imperial technology were mobilized for one purpose: to hunt down and destroy the Sparrow. But Captain Kyle Draven had never planned to fight alone. The attack on the Valix had been a message, not just to the Empire, but to every human colony under its boot. The moment the Sparrow struck, encrypted signals were sent across the Terran systems. Resistance cells, former military officers, engineers, and smugglers, all of them had been waiting for the call. By the time the Empire's 7th Armada arrived in the Sol system, the battlefield had changed. They expected a ragtag rebellion. What they found was a nightmare. Earth's scientists had spent years studying every piece of Imperial technology they could get their hands on. The Empire thought its systems were too complex for a primitive species to reverse engineer. That was their second mistake. The first was underestimating human desperation. When the Armada reached the outer edges of the solar system, their sensors detected something strange: scattered debris fields, remnants of ships that appeared to be torn apart. At first, they assumed the Sparrow had been destroyed. Then the wreckage started moving. The Empire had always relied on centralized AI coordination. If a fleet lost communication with its command node, it became sluggish, slow to react. Draven knew this, and so Earth's engineers had weaponized it. The wreckage drifting in space wasn't debris. It was bait. As soon as the first Imperial scout ships approached, hidden thrusters activated. The wrecks moved with terrifying speed, slamming into enemy hulls, detonating in a storm of electromagnetic pulses and kinetic shockwaves. Their AI-controlled ships reeled as their systems scrambled to adapt. Then the Sparrow struck. It didn't come alone this time. 5 more prototype ships had joined it, each different, each unique. Earth's technology wasn't standardized like the Empire's. Every vessel was a Frankenstein's monster of stolen parts, unconventional weapons, and unpredictable tactics. One ship was a railgun platform, launching hyper-velocity slugs that tore straight through Imperial shielding. Another was built for stealth, slipping between sensor blind spots before unleashing a swarm of guided torpedoes. One had no energy-based weapons at all, only gravity bombs that distorted space itself, warping enemy fire into useless spirals. And the Sparrow? It led the charge, weaving between ships, too fast, too erratic for the Empire's automated targeting systems to lock onto. Draven was everywhere and nowhere, firing bursts of solid metal rounds that shattered command bridges, puncturing fuel lines, and leaving chaos in his wake. The 7th Armada never stood a chance. For the first time in 1,000 years, an Imperial fleet was forced into full retreat. Earth had drawn blood, but the war had only just begun. The humiliation of the 7th Armada's defeat sent shockwaves through the Galactic Empire. The news was suppressed within their core worlds, but in the outer territories, where whispers traveled faster than Imperial sensors, rumors spread like wildfire. A backwater species had faced the mighty Empire in open combat, and won. The Emperor's Council convened in an emergency session. The loss of a single fleet was a minor inconvenience to an empire that ruled thousands of star systems. But the implications were far worse. Humanity had proven that the Empire was not invincible. Worse still, it had exposed their greatest weakness, arrogance, and now rebellion was spreading. On industrial slave worlds, workers refused to kneel. In the Empire's outermost sectors, governors received coded messages from human resistance leaders, offering them something the Empire never had: a choice. Not all species under the Empire's rule were conquered through war. Many were simply absorbed, their governments bribed or coerced into compliance. These species had grown resentful, watching as their people were taxed into poverty while imperial nobles bathed in luxury. Now, for the first time in centuries, they had an alternative. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were offering an alliance. The Empire's admirals dismissed the idea as foolish. No species would be reckless enough to side with the Terrans. After all, the Empire still held the advantage in sheer numbers and technology. They were wrong. The first defection came from an unlikely place: the Zeleri, a species known for their strict neutrality. Their government publicly condemned the Terran rebellion, but secretly funneled supplies to human-aligned factions. Then came the Veric, a warrior race that had long chafed under imperial rule. Their people admired strength, and humanity's audacity had earned them respect. Small skirmishes between Veric mercenaries and imperial patrols suddenly turned into outright sabotage. And then, the unthinkable happened. A high-ranking imperial admiral defected. Admiral Siriv Torin, a respected tactician and war hero, had served the Empire for over 300 years. But unlike the rest of the Imperial command, he recognized the storm forming on the horizon. The Empire's slow-moving monolithic war machine wasn't built to fight an insurgency. And humanity wasn't just any insurgency. They had proven they could outthink, outmaneuver, and outfight the best the Empire had to offer. Torin had studied the Sparrow's battle data. The tactics it employed shouldn't have worked. The Empire's own models had predicted an easy victory. Yet the humans had turned every disadvantage into a weapon. So Torin made a choice. He took his fleet, one of the few that hadn't yet been sent against Earth, and vanished into uncharted space. Days later, a transmission reached Terran High Command. It was Torin, and he had an offer. If you want to bring down the Empire, you'll need more than just ships. You'll need strategy. You'll need resources. You'll need someone who understands how the Empire thinks. I can give you all of that. But in return, I want one thing: victory. The war had truly begun. The decision to trust Admiral Siriv Kyle wasn't made lightly. To many in the Terran High Command, he was the embodiment of everything they hated about the Empire: a cold, calculating strategist who had spent centuries crushing rebellions and expanding imperial rule. How could they trust a man whose hands were stained with the blood of countless insurgents? But Captain Cale Druven saw something different. Cale wasn't defecting out of fear or desperation. He had studied humanity, understood their tactics, and instead of dismissing them as anomalies, he had adapted. That made him dangerous, but it also made him invaluable. Earth's military leaders debated for days. Some wanted Kyle executed on sight, afraid he was an imperial plant sent to dismantle the resistance from within. Others argued they needed his knowledge if they had any hope of turning scattered victories into a full-scale war. Draven ended the argument with a simple statement: "If he's lying, I'll put a railgun round through his skull myself." And so Kyle was granted an audience. The Imperial Admiral didn't come empty-handed. His fleet, though not large, was composed of top-tier warships, including a dreadnought, an asset humanity had no equivalent to. But more importantly, he brought intelligence, blueprints of Imperial ship layouts, supply chain vulnerabilities, encrypted backdoors into fleet command networks, weaknesses in the Empire's FTL navigation system. Kyle had been a loyal Imperial officer for centuries, but he had also been a student of history. He had seen what happened when empires grew too comfortable, too bloated, too convinced of their own invincibility. The Empire had relied on fear to maintain control, believing that no species would ever dare to resist them. The moment humanity had shattered that illusion, the cracks had begun to spread. Kyle's defection sent shockwaves through the Empire. More officers, some disillusioned, others simply pragmatic, began quietly reaching out to human contacts, offering information, small acts of sabotage, anything to avoid being on the losing side of history. The war was no longer just an insurgency, it was an uprising, and the first true battle was about to begin. With Kale's guidance, humanity targeted a system called Cyrithus, a heavily fortified Imperial naval base that controlled one of the largest supply routes between the Empire's core and its outer territories. Taking Cyrithus was suicide. At least that's what the Empire believed. On paper, it was impenetrable. Dozens of warships guarded the system, including 3 full battle cruisers. Orbital defenses were equipped with automated turrets capable of obliterating entire fleets. And at its heart lay the Empire's greatest advantage, the Nexus. The Nexus was an FTL relay station, allowing Imperial fleets to deploy reinforcements instantly. Any attack on Cyrithus would be overwhelmed in minutes, which is why Draven didn't attack it. Instead, he broke it. The Sparrow led the infiltration team. They didn't come in with guns blazing. They came in disguised as Imperial scavengers, using stolen identification codes provided by Kyle. The Empire's overconfidence worked in their favor. No one expected a direct assault, so no one suspected the Sparrow slipping through the defensive perimeter. Their target wasn't the Imperial fleet. It wasn't even the defense systems. It was the Nexus itself. The Empire had always assumed that superior technology was enough to make them untouchable. But Earth's engineers had spent years analyzing stolen Imperial tech, and they had discovered something horrifying. The Nexus relays operated on an artificial singularity, a controlled black hole used to bend space-time for near-instant travel. And black holes, no matter how controlled, could be destabilized. Draven and his team infiltrated the Nexus station, planting a chain of precision charges at key structural points. They had only minutes before security caught on. Alarms blared. Imperial soldiers poured into the corridors, firing plasma rifles as the Terrans fought their way out. By the time the Sparrow launched from the station, the charges had already detonated. The singularity inside the Nexus collapsed. For a fraction of a second, space itself screamed. A gravitational shockwave rippled through the system. Imperial warships caught in its range were pulled into chaos. Some were crushed outright, others were flung out of position, colliding into each other as their engines struggled to compensate. The Nexus was gone. And with it, Cyrithus' ability to call for reinforcements. That was when the real attack began. The stolen Imperial fleet, led by Kyle, dropped out of FTL on the system's fringes, launching a coordinated assault against the disoriented enemy ships. Earth's prototype warships, still vastly outnumbered, engaged in brutal hit-and-run tactics. Imperial commanders, accustomed to fighting predictable battles, struggled to adapt to the chaos. Their ships relied on formation-based strategies, centralized coordination, both of which had been shattered by the Nexus destruction. Draven took full advantage. The Sparrow weaved through the battlefield, dodging between larger capital ships, slipping under weapons arcs, delivering pinpoint railgun strikes that crippled engines, ruptured fuel lines, and left the mighty Imperial ships vulnerable to follow-up attacks. Kyle's fleet pressed the advantage, using Imperial tactics against the Empire. His captains knew exactly how their former allies would react, because they had once been part of the same machine. Within hours, the battle was over. Cyrithus, once an impenetrable stronghold, was in human hands. The Empire's supply chain was broken, and across the galaxy, a single, undeniable truth spread like wildfire. The Terrans were winning, but Draven knew better than to celebrate. The Empire had been humiliated, yes, but an enemy like this didn't crumble overnight. No, they would retaliate. And when they did, it wouldn't just be with fleets, it would be with everything they had. The war was far from over. It was just getting started. The Empire did not waste time licking its wounds. News of the Cerithus disaster spread fast, despite their attempts to suppress it. Every governor, every high-ranking officer, every noble who had ever profited from the Empire's dominance was now whispering the same question. How had the mighty Galactic Empire lost to humans? The answer didn't matter. What mattered was revenge. In the heart of the Imperial capital, a new force was assembled. Not just a fleet, an extermination force. The Empire had dealt with rebellions before, but those had always been internal. This was different. Humanity wasn't simply resisting. They were rewriting the rules of war, forcing the Empire to fight on terms it had never prepared for. And so, the Emperor's Council made a decision. The war would no longer be fought with half measures. The time for underestimating humanity was over. They activated the Purge Protocols. The 3rd and 5th Imperial Armadas, hundreds of warships, carriers, and dreadnoughts, were pulled from their patrol duties and consolidated into a single force. At its head was Grand Admiral Tovarik, a man who had no patience for failed strategies. Where previous commanders had sought to defeat the Terrans, Tovarik had been given a different order. Erase them. No more occupations. No more containment. No more political maneuvering. Earth and every colony that had declared loyalty to the rebellion were to be turned into nothing but ash. The first target was Titan. One of Saturn's moons, Titan had become a crucial staging ground for Terran operations. A shipyard, a supply depot, a symbol of humanity's growing defiance. It was the logical place for the Empire to strike first, and strike they did. Without warning, an Imperial dreadnought dropped out of FTL above Titan, accompanied by an entire battle group. Before ground defenses could react, kinetic rods the size of skyscrapers were launched from orbit. The sky turned into fire. Titan's shipyards, where the next generation of human warships was being built, were wiped out in an instant. Thousands of engineers, pilots, and technicians never had a chance to escape. By the time the first alarms rang across the solar system, Titan was already lost. The message was clear. The Empire was done playing. This was genocide. Draven watched the footage from Titan in silence. His crew expected him to lash out, to slam his fists against the console, to curse the Empire with every breath. But he didn't. His rage was something quieter, something colder, something far, far deadlier. He turned to Admiral Kyle. "How long until they come for Earth?" Kyle's expression was grim. "Not long. A week, maybe 2. The 3rd and 5th Armadas won't make the same mistakes as the 7th. They'll come in force, and this time they'll make sure there's no escape." Draven nodded slowly. The war had just changed. Humanity couldn't keep winning battles while losing the war. They had taken Cerithus, but in return, they had lost Titan. This wasn't a fight for survival anymore. This was a fight for the future. And if the Empire wanted to burn Earth to the ground, then humanity would have to do the impossible. They would have to strike at the heart of the Empire itself. The plan that took shape over the next few days was madness. Kyle laid out the cold, hard facts. Earth couldn't withstand a full Imperial invasion. Even with stolen technology and prototype warships, they were outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Humanity couldn't afford a long, drawn-out war. The Empire had resources to spare. The rebellion did not. If they wanted to win, they needed to do what no species had ever dared before. They needed to strike the Imperial capital. Not just attack it, not just send a message. They needed to cripple the Empire in one decisive blow. Draven leaned over the holotable, studying the map of the Imperial homeworld, Veloria Prime. It was the core of the Empire, protected by the largest fleet in the galaxy, surrounded by fortified moons, planetary shields, and orbital defense stations that had never been breached. Attacking it was impossible. But then again, so was everything else humanity had done so far. Draven smiled. Let's break the unbreakable. While the Sparrow led a decoy fleet into deep space, drawing the Empire's forces away, an infiltration team would slip past the capital's defenses. Their target? The Imperial throne itself. The rebellion didn't just need to hurt the Empire, it needed to decapitate it. If they could assassinate the Emperor, destabilize the Imperial command structure, and turn their own people against them, then maybe, just maybe, the war wouldn't need to last years. Maybe they could end it now. But failure meant extinction. The moment the plan was set in motion, there would be no turning back. Draven looked at his crew, his family. They had fought together, bled together. They had defied death more times than he could count. Now he was asking them to follow him one last time, to the Empire's doorstep, to the end of everything, and without hesitation they all said the same thing. We're in. The final battle was coming. Humanity would either rise, or it would burn. But either way, the Empire would never forget the name Earth. The Sparrow and its fleet hurtled toward the Imperial heartland, defying every expectation, every logical assumption of war. A human armada, if it could even be called that, was making a direct course for Valoria Prime, the Imperial throne world. It was an act of sheer insanity. No species had ever dared attack the home of the Empire itself. Even the mightiest civilizations had bowed before its power. But that was what made humanity different. They never knew when to kneel. The plan relied on misdirection. Draven and the Sparrow had become infamous, a ghost in the void that had shattered Imperial fleets, humiliated their commanders, and turned an impossible war into a winnable one. The Empire had learned to fear them, and fear made people predictable. A decoy force, assembled from stolen Imperial ships and barely functioning war machines, would launch a full frontal assault against the capital's outer defenses. It was a suicide run, meant to draw every available Imperial warship into a concentrated brawl. While the Empire scrambled to deal with what they believed to be the main attack, the real strike force, Draven, Kyle, and a small team of infiltrators, would slip through the chaos, making their way to the Emperor himself. The goal was simple: cut off the head of the snake. But simple didn't mean easy. Not even close. The battle began exactly as expected. When the stolen Imperial fleet dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Valoria system, the Empire reacted violently. Hundreds of warships scrambled to intercept, opening fire before the humans had a chance to form battle lines. The void was torn apart by energy beams, kinetic rounds, and nuclear detonations. The Imperial fleet expected an easy slaughter. They had the advantage in numbers, firepower, and coordination. But what they didn't have was desperation. Every pilot, every soldier in the decoy fleet knew they wouldn't be coming back. They fought like men and women with nothing left to lose, tearing through Imperial formations with reckless abandon. And as the Empire threw everything at them, bringing in reinforcements, rerouting every available dreadnought to crush the invaders, something happened that no one expected. The Imperial capital's defenses were thinning. That's when the Sparrow made its move. With Kale guiding them through the shifting battlefield, Draven and his infiltration team broke away from the chaos, taking a hidden route toward Valoria Prime itself. There was no room for error. No backup. If they were caught, the war was over. They passed through the outermost layers of the capital's defenses undetected, using stolen access codes and outdated Imperial security loopholes. But as they approached the planet, they found themselves facing an obstacle none of them had anticipated. The Emperor had expected them, and he had set a trap. A fleet within a fleet lay in wait, hidden inside a cloaked asteroid field near the capital's orbit. Warships that hadn't been deployed, hadn't been drawn away by the battle. They weren't here to defend the Emperor. They were here to kill Draven personally. The moment the Sparrow was detected, the ambush was sprung. A dozen Imperial battlecruisers decloaked, their weapons already locked on the tiny human ship. Draven had no time to think, no time to strategize. They were outgunned, outmatched, and completely surrounded. But they had one advantage. The Empire thought they were fighting by Imperial rules. They weren't. The Sparrow did the impossible. Again. Instead of fleeing, Draven charged straight at the largest battlecruiser in the fleet. He took the ship to knife-fight range, dodging through weapons fire, making it impossible for the other Imperial ships to fire without risking friendly casualties. His crew worked frantically, rerouting power, overclocking the engines to suicidal levels. The ship's hull groaned under the strain. The AI screamed warnings of imminent collapse. Draven ignored it all. He wasn't running. He was breaking through. The Sparrow twisted through enemy formations, launching EMP torpedoes at precise weak points, blinding sensors, disrupting targeting systems. The battlecruisers struggled to react, their gunners trying and failing to anticipate a ship that didn't fly like anything they'd ever faced. In the chaos, Coil executed the final part of the plan. A virus, built from stolen Imperial code and human ingenuity, was uploaded into the capital's planetary security network. For exactly 45 seconds, the defense grid around the Imperial Palace shut down. And that was all the time Draven needed. The Sparrow punched through the blockade, racing toward the capital below. The final mission had begun. The Imperial Palace was the most heavily guarded structure in the galaxy. It wasn't just a fortress. It was the seat of power for an empire that had ruled unchallenged for millennia. Draven and his team had 1 hour before the security grid rebooted. 1 hour to get inside. 1 hour to kill the Emperor. 1 hour to end the war. Failure meant the end of humanity. And as Draven stepped off the Sparrow, his rifle locked and loaded, he knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened next, the Empire would never be the same again. The palace was a city unto itself, towers of black stone and gleaming metal rising above the surface of Valoria Prime, guarded by thousands of elite Imperial soldiers, automated defense drones, and the deadliest warriors the Empire had ever bred. But for 45 seconds, all of it was blind. Draven and his team moved like ghosts, slipping through the outer defenses before alarms could reawaken. They had planned for this moment for months, studied every layout, memorized every patrol route. They had exactly one path to follow, through the Undercroft, an ancient tunnel system beneath the palace, once used by Imperial assassins to eliminate rivals. Now, it would serve the same purpose. Kyle led them through the shadows, his knowledge of Imperial security proving invaluable. "The throne chamber is at the top of the main spire," he whispered over comms. "We take the lift to the inner sanctum, bypass the honor guard, and neutralize the Emperor before he can call reinforcements." "Sounds easy," one of the soldiers muttered. Draven just smirked. "It never is." The first obstacle came faster than expected. A hunter-killer squad, Imperial commandos genetically engineered for war, was stationed near the tunnel's exit. They weren't panicked. They weren't confused. They were waiting. The Emperor knew. How much he knew was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The element of surprise was already slipping away. Draven didn't hesitate. He dropped to one knee, fired a single rail shot clean through the lead commando's skull, then sprinted forward as the corpse crumpled. The rest of the team opened fire, suppressing the remaining guards as Draven closed the distance. The commandos fought viciously. faster, stronger, deadlier than any standard Imperial soldier. But they weren't prepared for human unpredictability. One of them lunged at Draven, a plasma blade crackling to life. Draven sidestepped, grabbed the commando's wrist, and used the enemy's own momentum to drive the blade straight into his chest. The fight was over in seconds. But now the palace knew they were inside. The lift to the throne room was locked down. The only way up was through the Honor Guard, an elite division of warriors who had sworn their lives to the Emperor. Clad in power armor, armed with weapons capable of tearing through tanks, they were an immovable wall. They were also completely unprepared for Terran tactics. Kyle had warned them. Imperial guards fought with honor, with structure, with discipline. They expected challenges, duels, a methodical engagement. They didn't expect humans to fight dirty. Draven and his team threw grenades before stepping into the room. Smoke, flashbangs, sonic disruptors, anything to disorient the guards. Then they charged. Close combat in the Imperial Palace was supposed to be a death sentence, but Draven wasn't here to win clean. He was here to end the war. Railgun rounds punched through visors, explosives shattered armor plating, and before the guards could fully regroup, Kale's virus hijacked the lift controls. The doors slammed open. Draven and his team rushed inside. They were rising, straight to the throne room. The moment the doors opened, Draven saw him. The Emperor. He sat upon a throne of obsidian, clad in regal robes woven with shimmering golden filaments. His face was ancient, yet untouched by time, preserved by technology beyond human understanding. And he was smiling. "You've come so far," the Emperor said softly, "but you never had a chance." Then the throne room exploded with motion. From the shadows, Imperial war priests stepped forward, ancient warriors, each trained for centuries, wielding weapons forged in black holes, moving with impossible speed. Draven had no time to think. The final battle had begun. The throne room erupted into chaos. The Imperial war priests moved like phantoms, their bodies enhanced beyond normal limits, their weapons flickering with energy that could cut through armor like paper. Draven barely had time to dodge as a plasma-forged glaive slashed where his head had been seconds ago. The air crackled with the heat of it, the sheer force enough to leave scorched lines across the obsidian floor. The Emperor watched from his throne, his golden eyes filled with amusement. "You humans fight with such desperation," he mused, "like animals backed into a corner. Admirable, in a way, but ultimately—" Draven fired a railgun round straight at his skull. The Emperor didn't move. The round stopped mid-air, hovering inches from his forehead before crumpling into nothing. Draven felt the hairs on his arms rise. He had seen Imperial shielding before, but not like that. The Emperor wasn't just protected by technology. He was something else entirely, and that was when Draven knew. Killing this man wouldn't be as simple as pulling a trigger. The war priests attacked in perfect synchronization. One of them closed the distance with Kyle, a void staff spinning in his hands. The Admiral barely blocked the first strike, stumbling backward as the force of it sent him crashing into a marble pillar. Another war priest vanished from sight, only to reappear behind Draven. His instincts screamed. He dropped low, barely dodging the monomolecular dagger that sliced through the air where his spine had been. The battle became a blur of motion. Humans fighting like cornered wolves. The war priests like wraiths of death. Draven didn't fight fair. He grabbed a smoke grenade from his belt, slammed it against the ground, and disappeared into the thick black cloud. The war priests hesitated for a fraction of a second. And that was all he needed. Draven emerged from the smoke, his knife flashing. He drove it into the nearest war priest's exposed neck joint, twisting deep. The warrior let out a choked gasp, his enhanced body shuddering, but Draven didn't stop. He grabbed the dying war priest's sidearm, turned, and fired point-blank into the next one's visor. The plasma round melted through the Imperial warrior's skull, and suddenly, 2 were dead. But there were still more. Kyle fought like a man who had spent his entire life in the Empire's service. Because he had. The war priest bearing down on him swung again, aiming to cave in his ribs, but Kale sidestepped, grabbed the enemy's wrist, and turned his own momentum against him. The war priest slammed into the ground. Kale stomped on his head until his skull cracked. The remaining war priests hesitated. They weren't used to enemies who fought with such brutality. The Emperor, however, looked amused. "This is why we let your species live for so long," he murmured. "You surprise us, but now—" He lifted a single hand, and everything stopped. Draven's body froze in place, an invisible force locking his limbs. He couldn't move, couldn't fire, couldn't even breathe. His heart slammed against his ribs as the Emperor rose from his throne, stepping down toward them. "You were always going to lose," the Emperor said, gazing at Draven like he was something small, insignificant. "I will erase your people from the stars, not because I hate you, but because I cannot allow your disease to spread. You are too wild, too unpredictable, too ... His golden eyes gleamed. "Human." Draven felt his body breaking under the pressure, his mind screaming, his vision darkening. This was it. This was how it ended. Then, a gunshot. The force holding him vanished. The Emperor staggered, golden eyes widening in shock. Draven collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. And standing behind the Emperor was Kyle. The Admiral's gun was still raised, his face grim. He had just shot the Emperor in the back of the head. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, the Emperor straightened. The wound in his skull closed instantly, golden energy knitting flesh back together. He turned, smiling. "Ah," he said, "Admiral Kyle. I was wondering when you'd make your choice." Kale didn't hesitate. He fired again. And again. And again. Plasma rounds tore into the Emperor's body, burning holes straight through his robes, scorching his flesh. But he wouldn't die. He just kept smiling. "You think your weapons can kill a god?" he whispered. Draven saw Kyle's hand shake, and for the first time since the war began, he saw something in the Admiral's eyes. Fear. Draven moved. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He just acted. His fingers found the last explosive charge on his belt, a high-yield grav bomb, one designed to collapse a ship's internal structure. He grabbed it, activated it, and lunged straight at the Emperor. The moment Draven tackled him, the world vanished in a flash of light. He felt himself falling, gravity twisting, the Emperor's voice whispering in his mind, not with anger, but with disappointment. And then, darkness. Somewhere far above the burning throne room, the Sparrow waited in low orbit. "Come on," the pilot muttered, fingers clenched around the controls. "Where the hell are you guys?" Then, her sensors flashed. A single transmission, weak, barely readable. Draven's voice. "Mission accomplished. Get out." Then static. The Sparrow's engines roared to life. It turned away from the battlefield, fleeing into the black void of space. Humanity's final mission was over. But had they won? Or had they unleashed something far worse? The war should have ended that day. When Draven detonated the grav bomb in the throne room, the explosion should have collapsed everything: the palace, the Emperor, and any hope of Imperial retaliation. But nothing was ever that simple. The Sparrow barely escaped Vyloria Prime. Imperial forces scrambled to respond, but without clear leadership, the counterattack was slow, disorganized. The Emperor's personal fleet, once the backbone of the Empire, was in chaos. Kyle took command of what remained of the human fleet, ordering a full retreat back to Seoul. They had accomplished the impossible. They had struck at the very heart of the Empire. But victory still felt hollow, because Kael Draven was gone. Days passed, then weeks. The Empire, leaderless and humiliated, fractured. Governors declared independence. Military factions turned against each other. The outer colonies revolted en masse. The empire that had once stretched across the stars was now devouring itself, a beast tearing itself apart from within. Humanity had won. But at what cost? Kyle stood in Earth's newly built war room, overlooking a holographic projection of the galaxy. The imperial borders were dissolving. Rebellions burned like wildfire. New alliances were forming. But one thing still haunted him. Draven's body had never been found. No wreckage, no trace, just vanished. Some believed he had been vaporized in the explosion. Others thought he had been pulled into the collapsing grav field. A few whispered something else, that he wasn't dead at all, that the Emperor had taken him somewhere else. Kyle didn't believe in ghosts, but something about the way the Empire's forces hesitated, how certain high-ranking officers refused to surrender, as if waiting for a command that never came. It unsettled him, because deep down, in the coldest part of his mind, he feared one terrible possibility, that the Emperor wasn't dead either, and that if he ever returned, humanity's war wouldn't be over at all. Far beyond known space, in the void between galaxies, something stirred. A figure stood on a broken throne, golden eyes glowing in the dark, smiling, waiting. And Kael Draven, his body changed, his mind not entirely his own, knelt before him. The war wasn't over. It was only sleeping. For now.